Hi everybody, thanks for coming to listen to me waffle on for an hour about slow cooking. It's actually something that I quite enjoy. I'd be fond of throwing something in the cooker at home of a Sunday morning before I would take the kids to football or go for a few pints, and it's very reassuring knowing that something is slowly cooking away at its own pace, and you don't have to stress about it. So it works great at home. It also brings all the same benefits that you need in the workplace as well, especially with the way things are going. I think we're all short-staffed. We're all under pressure to get better margins, increase consistency, and just to make sure that there is no waste, and slow cooking ticks all of those boxes. So first of all, it's about the choices of the cuts that you use. So doing a demo like this is always going to be difficult because it can only be based on here's one I made earlier. So we threw them in last night. And we've just pulled them out now, but I've got the raw things here now that we were going to do. There is, I guess, before we go through each thing, we can talk about the benefits of slow cooking, and what cuts you're looking for, how to cook them, and what's the process. So slow cooking is never going to work with beef fillet or pork loin because they just don't have the fat or the muscle to be cooked for long periods of time. So what you're looking for is something nice and fatty, gelatinous, lots of sinew, lots of marbling. These are often the cheaper cuts. So if you were doing a Sunday roast in work, for example, it's always fairly stressy who wants the sirloin pink, who wants it well done, what time to start it, what time to finish it. If you carve the first piece at 5 to 12 and it's tough and you'll fuck them for service, you know, it's just a big huge drama. If you're doing something with 2 or 3 Sunday joints, you'll be a fool not to have at least 2 of them not kind of pre-done through the night before. A perfect example would be the beef cheeks and the pork belly. So both of them are very, very keenly priced. You're taking so many risk factors out of your equation then. The beef cooked this way is going to produce for you the most amazing gravy. There is not gravy on this planet that can match the stock, a gravy made from the beef cheek stock. You know, it's lip smacking good. It's what you want. It's what the customers want. Very often, especially if you're dealing with a wide range of ages, people want a sure thing. They want something that is very, very tender. The pork belly works fantastically as well. We put it in through the night, and when we come in the next day, we finally just kickstarts the whole day perfectly. When you walk into the kitchen and there's a nice smell is there, and it also takes the pressure off of all of the pot work and pan work that morning. So our usual Saturday night would be popping 2 or 3 pork bellies and some beef cheeks in. I've got a fairly simple method of just fucking something in for an hour on full and then turning down. That first step is key. You need to kickstart the whole thing off and bring the whole lot up to the holding temperature. If you just put something in directly at 75 degrees, especially if it's got like 5 or 6 liters of stock in a big gastro tray, it's never going to get up to temperature. And by the time you get to work the following morning, or if it gets popped in that morning for lunchtime, it's only going to be barely warm. So that first step of popping it in on full, when I say full, I'm talking on 220 degrees, and then we turn it down. Each one of my chefs has a different theory on the precise degree it should go on through the night. I don't think it really matters too much if it's, once it's between 75 and 85, I think then you're fine, because that's the perfect temperature to break down all the fats, break down all the sinews. There is a bit of science behind this, and when you're breaking those fibers down at that temperature, that all turns into flavor. That all turns into turning your sauce very, very sticky, beautiful. That kind of unctuous flavor that sticks with you for the day. So that would be the first part of the process, would be to get all of the stuff up to temperature. Something like the beef cheeks now here, they would require longer than the pork belly, in my opinion, and longer than the pulpo. So the cheeks, we usually go for a minimum of 8 hours, never coming to the boil whatsoever, just a long, slow, gentle simmer. The pork belly is the same. The pulpo is more vital than that. That would never come to the boil, because it's not as lean as, say, it's more lean than the beef cheeks or the pork belly or something like a lamb shoulder. So that requires a bit more delicate handling, but it's also a showstopper of a dish. If you've got guests coming around and you want to pop something unusual in, and you might be scared to cook this, doing it as a slow roast casserole just takes all of the pressure out of the situation completely. So I'm just going to start off now with the pork, because that is top of my list. The pork, we do it, this is from John O'Reilly. One of the things that we do with a pork is we would confit it. And so the way that I'm describing it now can be used for duck legs, lamb shoulders, pig's cheeks, whatever you want. Very often, or very few places will have buckets of duck fat lying around the kitchen like we would, because we are constantly confying. I know that in the true sense of doing the confit, it's meant to be cooked in its own fat. I would rather it's cooked in a fat than let's say a vegetable oil. So if you find yourself with pork belly but you don't have the pork fat or lard to do that, don't cook it in vegetable oil, because the flavor won't be there. Most butchers would happily throw you a kilo of beef fat. So I would pop the pork into a tray with enough raw beef fat or duck or pork lard to cover it. The beef fat is going to render down as it cooks, and you'll actually be left with some beautiful crispy beef crackling, which all of the chefs in my kitchen usually would fight over on a Sunday morning for their breakfast, especially if they're slightly hungover. So we would pop this in, completely covered in a fat of some sort, loads of salt, bay leaves, a few bulbs of garlic. We always take this chance to add loads of bulbs of garlic into that, into the fat that we're going to cook in. What it does, it puts a flavour into the pork, and then that also leaves us with a load of confit garlic to use through the week in various forms, if it's in mayonnaises or dressings or gravies or that kind of thing. And the beauty of the confit is you just keep getting to reuse the fat over and over and over and over, and it just gets better and stronger with each time. The true confit is cooked. Let's say that a true duck leg confit, you would cook the duck legs inside the duck fat and then leave them for 6 weeks inside that fat to mature. We don't quite go that far. I'm sure we'd only get shit from the health inspector if we were to go more than a few days, you know. So that's the pork belly. I've got a little, here's one that we made earlier. But this went in through the night then. And as you can see, it's perfectly tender. The meat falls off of the bone. You could do absolutely anything with this now at this stage, you know. The fact that we cooked this in was the pork lard. It's nice and clean, you know. It can be used time and time again. We've got the rib bones here, which I would then roast and crisp up into a gravy. What I would usually do then would be to take out this the belly part here. Just leave that out in the air to dry for, let's say, 1 hour or so. I know that this looks fucking awful now, but once it gets scored and seasoned, what you're left with is something like this. And that required nothing at all than a pinch of salt and 15 minutes in at 220, and we've got the perfect crackling now. It's still butter tender on the base. No one is going to complain about this whatsoever. You've got all of the best qualities of the pork. You've got the fat has rendered down now into a fat. Into your confit. You've got the crispy skin. You've got this beautiful soft meat beneath it, and it's just like absolutely beautiful. It's butter tender. We would often that then can be used for absolutely anything. You can portion it and serve it as a roast pork with crackling. You can turn it into a curry. You can turn it into a stew, whatever you want. We've actually had great success in marinating them at this stage now in a barbecue sauce and just grilling them, and they've been fantastic. So that's the pork. Now we're going to have a quick chat about the braising beef braising. So these are beef cheeks. This method can be used with almost any cut, like we discussed earlier. Cheeks, trotters, shoulders, legs of lamb. Sometimes if they're fatty enough. Often the cheaper lamb is slightly more fatty or muttony. That's actually great for this because if you are roasting lamb and when you go to serve it, you find it's a bit muttony, you're fucked for service, you know, because nobody wants it. But if you've taken the pressure out of the situation by slow braising it, you've diluted that and you can adjust the stock. So if the stock is muttony, you've still got the lamb, but a slightly muttony gravy is very, very easily fixed rather than trying to fix a muttony joint. So this kind of method of slow cooking, you're just making it so much more consistent. So what I mean that is like if you're trying to cook something pink or trying to time a joint to be cooked exactly for 12 o'clock, there's so many things that can cause a bump in the road. When you go home on a Saturday night knowing that your Sunday morning is all boxed off Your stocks are ready. If your biggest drama on a Sunday morning is that your stock is slightly mutton, that's a dream come true. With beef cheeks, that's never going to be the case. It's my favorite gravy. We have often turned this not just as a slow braised beef. You can flavor this stock with anything that you want. We would often turn it into a Nahari beef with lots of spices. It makes a fantastic soup this way, because what you're left with after it gets cooked. Let me show you now. Sorry, now this is so this is what we pulled out now this morning. So what you're left with is a beautiful stock. Is there a label? 1 second. Is a beautiful stock, and this stock and these cheeks. So these cheeks are like butter here now. I won't destroy them because we need to serve them. But that stock there can be used and turned into anything whatsoever. I would often have on a Sunday morning a roux on the go as these get lifted out, and I just ladle this hot stock straight into my roux, and my gravy is done. The same principle can go for if you were to turn this into a curry, if you were to turn it into a beef cheek hot and sour soup. You can do with this whatever you want. If you're and very often, if you cook it in a plain way like this, you only really need to make your mind up what it's going to be the following day. You know, I've also had great days in just having beef and ginger and spring onions. You know, it's ace. And then I'll just show you one of the cooked versions then. So this is the cheek that we've cooked. I'm sure if you can properly see that there. But this is a cheek now that's there. This is required no work whatsoever, apart from slightly reducing the stock and thickening it. So that's there. Let me just try to get you a good camera angle there. And I'm just going to cut this one with a knife, just so you can see how beautiful it is inside. Like, it's absolutely stunning. It's still pink because it's not been cooked too high. It's beautifully tender. You could nearly eat that with a spoon. The flavor is just absolutely beautiful here, you know. One of the things that I enjoy about this as well, it presents so many chances to recycle the dishes. If this was left inside the stock and you don't sell the 40 portions that you thought that you would sell, it will make a fantastic staff meal, because the chances of all of your staff being able to sit down together and eat all at the same time is basically nil most of the time. So having something as a backup like this for staff meal, it stays hot through the course of the day, because the first person could take their staff meal at 5 to 12, and the last person could take their last staff meal at 12:30 midnight. So we would very often, especially of a busy weekend day, make a staff meal in this form. And once again, it goes in on the Saturday night, and on Sunday morning, no one is concerned about what the staff meal is. It's there, it's hot, it's nutritious. It might seem like a small thing, but your staff, when they are well fed, when they know that there is food there for them, it's just a nice feeling, especially with a fucking busy long day in work, you know. So that's that. So when I would be choosing the cuts, I would often chat to the butcher and see not what he's trying to shift, but what he has there. If he has an abundance of pig trotters, say, and he'll do you a price on buying them all. To slow braise them, you know, it's a no-brainer. You'll get your GP, you'll get your margin. It doesn't require the same kind of skill set as if they were to be popped in a pot, you know. When you're slow braising things as well, and you've taken all the variables out of the situation. So if you as a head chef or a senior chef know that that beef is now, or that piece of meat is now butter tender, the sauce is done, it's perfectly seasoned, the actual cooking for service can be handed down to more junior and less skilled chefs. And I think that's going to be the way things will go for the next 6 months, because we're all short-staffed. We're all possibly having to give promotions to staff that in usual circumstances wouldn't get them. We need to trust them more. And I think that if we adopt the slow cooking more into the kitchens, we can spread the responsibilities around way handier. The customer's still getting a fantastic product, and the lesser used cuts are going to get used more and more, which is always a very, very good thing. For the record, I also popped into that tray earlier. I got a Rick some beautiful oxtail, which we're going to turn into spring rolls as well. So we would often cook two things the same way, and then just to split the sauce out into two and make two completely different dishes from one method of cooking. Am I talking too fast and wrecking your heads now? I'm just having a quick peek at my notes here, you know. So we've discussed how all of the slow cooking breaks down the tendons, the fats, the sinew, the cartilage. Those things are all bad if something is cooked medium, or if it's handled in a bad way. Those things are all great if they're handled in a good way, slow cooked and broken down and turned from waste into flavor. So we also discussed about then how we can ask the butcher for beef fat if we don't have anything to start off with the compium. With slow braising, it's very, very important what you're doing. All of the good parts of what we just discussed there about breaking down all the flavors and turning that into the stock. It's now super important to reintroduce that stock back into the meat, because if we don't do that part, the meat that you're going to serve is going to taste of nothing, because all the process that we've just done there has turned that meat into something fairly tasteless and bland. So it's key not to fall into the trap of just serving that meat now without the sauce being brought back into it. That's vital. I've seen guys that have cooked the cheeks beautifully and then just serve the cheeks without the sauce that he or she has cooked them in, and the customers left wondering why their food now tastes like fucking air. So don't be that person. I just want to now talk about the octopus. So why I chose this, which might seem like a bit of a curveball, which it is, because by this stage, I'm sure that most of the people on here are chefs. By this stage, you would have all at some stage cooked a pork belly in this way, or slow braised a lamb shoulder, and beef cheeks and those kind of things. So I might be preaching to the converted there. When I was in Croatia recently, they done us a spit roast pig, and we had the most enjoyable Sunday afternoon where they made the pig, and that was done over the coal fire. And as we were starting to eat the pig, I saw that they started to dig out the coals and to plant a cast iron pot inside the coals. And what they were doing is they were making the late night snack for that night, or cooking something for the following morning. In this case, it was called a peka or a pika. I can never get it right. And it was a cast iron pot, and inside was a nice big pulpo, some garlic, some thyme, some lime and bay leaves, white wine, and a bit of stock or water. And what they've done is they reused the heat from the coals to cook this. So they dug the hole down, they put in a cast iron pot like this down into the ground. They put the coals back over that then, and they just left it there. And it's the exact same process as the rationale. Maybe they don't have all the bells and whistles that the rationale has, but it was a method that I had never seen before, and it was so good. And so that's why I thought I would do a slight curveball like this now. So what they did, the same process actually. So I'm sure that the heat from the coals then brought the whole pot up to the desired temperature. There was no probes or that kind of thing. And then 6 or 7 hours later, it gets pulled out, and it's beautiful, just like that. It was butter tender. It was absolutely stunning. And if I recall correctly, we had the pig at lunchtime. So they started off that morning. We had the pig at lunchtime, and then when we were all slightly drunk, when I say slightly drunk, we were all fucking hammered. And they served this then to us in the nighttime, and it was so good because they had repurposed the coals in this way, and it was absolutely beautiful. As you can see there, that is absolutely falling off. I could probably even slice that now if I chose to. Doing a dish like this would usually be very scary, especially if you were doing it as a starter and trusting a junior chef to keep it nice and tender. The stock here is absolutely stunning. So what we would do is we would reduce this right down. So when I cook this, I wouldn't season it too much at the start, because I'm going to reduce this entire pot down to a stock, maybe leaving myself a cupful. And from that cupful of stock, I've got, it's like pure jelly. It's so good, and it can be used for absolutely anything. We would either use that as a liqueur to cook, let's say, mussels and cockles in as a garnish for this. You could thin a mayonnaise down with it to make it slightly lighter and to give the flavor. When it is reduced down, it's this bright, vibrant pink as well, which make a great base for a risotto. And it can also make a fantastic vinaigrette. So if you have produced this right down, and 1/3 the stock, 1/3 vinegar, and 1/3 a good oil, and you're absolutely laughing. It's beautiful. Cooking something like octopus in this way, that will allow the junior chef to also know he's dealing with something that he can't fuck up, really. We've taken all of the variables out. It's perfectly tender. You can get it pre-portioned out. You know exactly how many portions are there. All they're doing is warming it back through. Once you have slow cooked the thing in, once you've slow cooked a piece of meat or fish and it's now soft, it can't go tough again. So it's very reassuring to know that once it's got to this stage that it can't go bad again. So then it's just a case about getting creative then with the sauces or dressings. So yeah, that's my talk about the pulpo. There is a couple more things that I just want to say. Especially when you confit something, you're left with this beautiful fat that can be used for anything now. So for roast potatoes, I would often put a ladle full of the lard into my rice cooker when I cook rice. That's why I'm fat. But it's just a wonderful, beautiful flavor. It's no waste whatsoever. It's a fantastic way of doing things. The rationale is actually great. I'm sure that you can even program it to do all of the different things. We would be fairly old school still. We would put the stuff in and have a quick beer after service, and then just turn the temperature down before we go home, and it's there for us in the morning. I'm going to go back for a bit of Q&A now. If anybody has anything to ask or to question there to you guys at all, is there?
Thanks, Gaz. Yeah, that's fantastic. Couple of questions in. Neve asks, she says, thanks first of all for some great advice. She's wondering what type of beef you'd recommend for curry so that you'd end up with tender slices.
The beef shin is great for that. And you can actually get them on the bone. So just think of like a tastier version of veal shank. So the beef shank or the beef shin it's absolutely beautiful. And then I would leave that to sit. So you can make a curry stock that will. So you would be cooking the beef shins inside the spices that you want. Then I would leave that to chill, and then you can slice the beef as thin or as thinly as you like. Very often when you're doing the slow cooking like this, it's very good to do it the previous day. I know that I touch very heavily on for ease of service for the following day. It's actually a great thing to do with a day before. Leave the things to kind of chill inside the stock again. Very often something like that, the beef is going to reabsorb all that flavor naturally through the night, and then when you're slicing it, however thin or thickly you like, you've got complete control on it then, and you're dealing with a flavored piece of meat more so than a bland piece of meat. Now I want some beef curry, but yeah, so beef shin would be great. Cheek is great as well. That would be my choices there, or short ribs are fantastic as well, although I'm a fan of doing them in as a confit, but curried short ribs are ace. But yeah, beef shin, let them chill inside the stock, and then you've got complete control over how thick or thinly you want to serve them, knowing that they are perfectly tender.
That's great, thank you. Another comment here, I've seen the beef cheeks cooked the same way here in Spain, but with carrot and onions, etc. Sauce can be blitzed afterwards for a more immediate sauce or left whole. Can I ask why you choose not to?
we would often do that as a stew or like a curry. We would so the lads would often put in the muepa in when they cook the things. That is a very good method, you know. And probably I should be adopting the less flour in my sauces. I'll be fairly old school in my approach like that. In fact, my two head chefs of Croatian, they would do the same. They would always to put vegetables in theirs, then that gets passed through a sieve. But I like to keep mine as a broth and turn the broth into a gravy. There's no right or wrong way in this whatsoever, and I'm certainly not going to argue with the way that has worked for hundreds and hundreds of years, both ways actually, of either using the vegetables to thicken the sauce or gravy. So there's no right or wrong way. It's personal preference. Both work, and I do use both methods.
Great, thank you. Somebody here looking for suggestions for leftover recipes for the beef and pork if you don't use it all up.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I touched on it earlier. One of the things that we are going to be walking into over the next 6 to 9 months is, as the price of everything raises, is to get that extra percent on the GP that we don't have to pass on to the customers. So things like wastage and that kind of thing is going to play a huge part of what we do for the next 12 months, more than since the last recession, I feel. So being able to recycle dishes in this way will be key. To be honest, once the meat is that tender, you can do anything with it. I've spoken about curries. I would sometimes turn them into risottos or some rice dishes. Whatever you want. I'm drawing a blank here, whereas usually I wouldn't whatsoever. I've often, what have I done with it? We were at home where the kids make it into a beef noodle soup. So just stock the add some vegetables and just crack some spaghetti into it. That's what we would do. The beef as well, we've often, there is a dish that we've done with cumin, black pepper and lime, just to take out the beef and marinate that in loads of cumin seeds, lime juice, black pepper, chilies, and you're just lashing that into a pan then, and making it nice and tasty. You can add things into it like soy sauce and some sesame. We have in work a whole pile of condiments, and we just get very creative that way. So whatever takes your fancy. I know that's a pretty shitty answer, but depending on my mood, that is what we do with it.
That's great, thanks guys. Somebody asking here, did you have much of an adjustment when you started working slow cooking into your menu in terms of the daily shift planning for the team? So you have extra work to be done in the evening preparing?
Not really. I mean, to do the methods that we discussed earlier, there's actually very little work involved in it. It's certainly way more cost-effective staff-wise if people know that this beef dish can be popped into trays or gastros between services just knowing that it's being chucked into the cooker then at the end of the night or first thing in the morning. If anything, we found it's made life handier, because we know if you're putting in 40 beef cheeks into a tray, there's 40 portions. Everyone knows in the kitchen there is 40 portions in that. It's taken lots of the stress out of the morning times. So any readjustment has actually been a very positive one. You'll find that the guys would get the stuff done in the afternoon and cooked then through the night with little to no stress whatsoever. Yeah, so no, it's been no adjustment at all. You would think sometimes that the customers might get concerned when they see the lesser known cuts being used, things like adobo beef or beef cheek or pork belly, and I know that might be a concern to some people, but once they've tried it once, they will very often return to that. So from a staffing and shift pattern point of view, it's all been very positive, and it is taking the pressure out of the day. From a customer point of view, if the dish is marketed correctly, that they don't seem, it's not worded as something negative, what we do, we would put in how long it was cooked for. So we would call it a 16-hour slow confit beef cheek, and that's a way handier sell, or you'd call it adobo beef. And we've often found what we thought the customers might not appreciate it too much, they really do. And we've done things like beef platters, where we've had 5 different types of beef, completely different types. We've had the Japanese A5 Wagyu, we've had the Galician beef, we've had the Castle Dermot beef, we've had the slow braised cheek and a beef tartare, all on the same plate. So 5 of the best, and the cheek is the one that always wins out. So it's I went off in a complete fucking tangent there, but what I was trying to say is that if people do have concerns about serving these to the customers, I don't think they need to at all. I think once the customer has a piece of pork or beef that melts in the mouth, is full of flavor, is juicy, they would prefer that. The next time, I feel that most customers, if they're like me, they want a sure thing. If they know that they're going to get a beautifully tender lamb shank every single time in this place, instead of a place that it's tough one week and it's muttony the next week, and then it's burnt the week after that, I would almost always choose a sure thing over anything that has a question mark over it. So completely didn't answer the fucking question, but very sorry about that.
No problem, that's great, thanks Gaz. Another question here, do you trim the outer sinew off the beef prior to cooking cheeks? Was the beef cheeks cooked using your confit method in beef fat? If you decide to cook the cheeks in water, how would you adjust the gravy? So we do trim the sinew off of, if it's very sinewy, we would, or if we weren't doing it through the night, we definitely would trim it more. If you're cooking for 12 hours, it's all going to break down anyway. You can trim it. I would certainly be leaving it inside the stock though.
I spent years trimming it, and recently I stopped, and I haven't noticed a difference whatsoever. That being said, not all beef cheeks would be the same. So we would use your own judgment. If they land into you and they're full of fat and sinew, like 50-50, I would be returning them. But if it's only 20% fat and sinew, I would leave it on. Just give it a good score. What was the second part of the question about the gravy with the confit?
So he's asking, was the beef cheek cooked using your confit method in beef fat? And if you decide to cook the cheeks in water, how would you adjust the gravy?
Oh, so we wouldn't. The cheeks that I did today were cooked in stock. So they weren't cooked in beef fat. The pork was cooked in fat. So there'd be no gravy left over from the pork, of course. But there would be. I find with this method, if you're slow cooking something, you always end up with way more gravy than you need. So if you were to do 40 cheeks, you'd often get 50 or 60 portions of gravy from the stock produced from 40 cheeks. We would cook them in stock. I'm not going to pretend that we don't ever use the bouillons. I always use the stock gels at home. I think they're fantastic. I've got no huge problem with them whatsoever. So when you cook the cheeks in water, you are turning that into stock, and then that gets turned into gravy. If you're cooking something just in a confit oil, you're only going to get a minimal bit of jus out of whatever you've cooked, you know. So negligible. That's when you would have to make up a sauce. Like if we were to confit short ribs, for example, we're not going to get any gravy off of that whatsoever. But you're not taking the flavour out of the meat in the same way that you would if you're braising. So there is a bit of science involved in if you cook something in water or if you cook something in a fat. So when you cook something in water, you're taking the flavour out of the piece of meat into the stock. Whereas if you're cooking something in a fat, you're not taking the flavour out as much. That's why, say, a confit duck leg will still taste of duck. Whereas if a duck leg has been braised, the stock will taste the duck, and duck will taste very bland. So, long story short, you don't really need to concern yourself too much with your confit, because you're keeping a flavour inside the meat, and you're also giving yourself something to crisp up beautifully, which is going to reintroduce that. And then I would often just serve that with a zappy vinaigrette. I'd be a whore for the vinegar now. If I confit something, I would make a very, very harsh and strong vinaigrette. And if it would be something particularly fatty, the vinaigrette that you're going to serve it with, it should make you gurney a bit, you know. It's a bit too strong by itself, but when you serve that then with the meat, it's just perfect and cuts through it. I find often the chefs wouldn't be a fan of serving very sharp things, but they would take a spoon of it by itself and it tastes too sharp. But that same spoon served with the meat, you know, it's just perfect, because it balances out perfectly.
Great, thank you. Niall is just asking to recap on the temperature and time to cook the beef and the pork at.
So, first thing is the bucketing method. That's the first step. So we would almost always go in at 220 for 1 hour. it would be very, very rare that that would not kickstart the tray of whatever we're cooking up to temperature. Then it all depends. If you're doing the big deep gastro, you might want to do it for an extra 20 minutes or so. And then down to 75 to 85 degrees. What's very important in this method is we always double tin foil. What you don't want, especially when you're lifting the trays in, is to burst the foil. You want them, the meat should be completely covered in a liquid of some form, be it stock or fat, and double tin foil so that all of the heat stays inside. You don't want any steam escaping whatsoever, because what's going to happen, you're going to come in the next day and find your tray is bone dry. So just make sure not to pierce the tin foil. Lash it in on 200 to 220 degrees for an hour, down to 75 to 85. Once in a while, you're going to come in the morning and you're going to put your fork or knife into the piece of meat to see, is it tender, and it's just not quite there. And it's just a case of popping it back in on 200 degrees for 30 more minutes. By this stage, if it's still not tender by this stage, it's never going to be tender. We have kickstarted up to full temperature. We've cooked it through the night at a temperature that should be breaking down every bit of sinew and toughness, and then we have given it another half an hour. So if it's not tender by then, you're fucked. Just go into the cold room and cry, because you're now short one dish. I have on occasion been that person who thought it was screwed. As the dishes cooled down and cooled down and cooled down, it started to relax, and something that I thought was beyond salvage is now butter tender again. So don't panic. But to recap, in at full for an hour, up to temperature, low and slow for 6 hours minimum, ideally through the night. If you're not convinced, an extra half an hour on a full isn't going to do any harm whatsoever. But don't panic.
Okay, that's great. That's all the questions we have for now, unless anyone else wants to pop up anything else or ask anything else.
Would anyone like to ask if Rationale want to give me a free oven? No?
We can certainly pass that on as a request for sure.
Okay, then I guess thank you very much for listening to my waffle. I hope that it helped. It's a method that I genuinely believe in. It's quite hard to do as a demo because we can't show the different processes. You know, it's not like the prep work, because the whole idea of it is that there's very little prep work involved in it. If you're unsure about trying it in work, try it at home on your days off, you know, and get the practice that way. There is nothing better than popping something in at lunchtime, going for a few pints and landing home, and your dinner's there ready for you with no work. So
great. One quick last question, Gaz, if you would. John is just wondering, would you finish the pulpo over coals or flames for char?
You can do with this at this stage now. You can do with it whatever you want. We would pop ours into a dry hot pan, and that would caramelize it. I've had great success on the barbecue. I've had great success just dipping it in flour and frying it. I wouldn't be putting it on the dirty coals over a barbecue there yet, of course. what I'm actually going to do with this one now, we're going to marinate this in 1 part lime juice, 1 part sugar, and 1 part pineapple juice. And then we're just going to throw that into a pan so it will caramel up nicely. And then we'll be left with a charred glaze on the exterior, and it's still nice and juicy inside. But all you're really doing now at this stage is warming it back through, because there's no need to make it piping hot again. So yeah, whatever you choose to do is great. I was in a place in Spain last year, and they served it simply in breadcrumbs, and it was beautiful as well.
Fantastic, thank you. So thanks, Gaz, for imparting all your vast knowledge of slow cooking today. I hope everyone found the session useful and interesting. The recording of the session will be available on the Chef Network website in the coming days, so keep an eye out for that. And thanks everyone for joining, and have a great day.
Cheers.